In this lesson, we'll learn how we can set up a material ID for our objects in V-Ray. Alright, so really just about any rendering artist will be able to tell you that one of the major rules to keep in mind when rendering is that you want to render your image out in a way that gives you the greatest amount of freedom to make any changes you want in post. So once I have my final render, let's say I want to be able to come in and make minor color corrections to certain areas, or tweak the coloration or the lighting a little bit in certain areas in post. Well, the ability to actually do that in something like Photoshop or After Effects or any compositing app, the more ability you give yourself to do those kinds of things in the compositing app without actually having to come back to Maya and re-render, the better off you're going to be. So if I were to try to come in, and let's say in post I wanted to color correct some of these little green spheres. Right now, I would actually have to come in and try to hand mask out those areas in my compositing application, and that could be a really meticulous, tedious job, and the amount of time I spend doing that, I'd probably be better off just coming back and re-rendering. So how can I actually give myself a little bit more freedom and control to make these kind of adjustments in post? Well, one way that we can do this in V-Ray is to use what's called a Material ID pass. And we'll see just what that looks like here in just a second. But for now, what we need to do is go in and actually start to assign some material IDs to the different materials in our scene. So let's bounce over into the hypershade, and let's grab one of our V-Ray materials. In this case, I'm going to start with the orange DT material. Now, with this material selected, let's go ahead and take a look at the output connections so we can get to this material shading group. So once we have this active, let's now go to Attributes, V-Ray, and turn on this Material ID option. So we now have this extra V-Ray attributes that becomes available. Let's go ahead and expand that. And we have the Material ID, and we also have the Multi-Matte ID. Now the Multi-Matte we'll talk about in one of our other lessons. For now, we're just going to focus on the Material ID. So what we can do is come in and really just define any color we want for our Material ID. Now, just to make this a little bit easier to see when it actually comes time to render this, I'm just going to take my Material ID and grab this little eyedropper tool, and I'll make it the same color as the basic material itself. Alright, now I'm going to come back and do this to my other materials as well. So let's say this little blue material, let's double click on that and follow its output connections. Now here's something that you're going to want to keep in mind whenever working with V-Ray and Maya, and that is inside of this blue material you can see there's already a V-Ray attributes with this orange swatch already applied to it. Now, this is really not the case, because really what we're seeing is just an update or a refresh issue. Because if we were to select this shading group, go up to the Attributes, V-Ray, you can see there actually is no Material ID assigned. So, like I said, really this is just a refresh or an update issue. So, to fix this, we can just bounce over to the material itself, and then back to the shading group again. And now that's forced this to update, and that Material ID is no longer there. So, let's now go back, assign the Material ID properly, and again we'll just use this same color for our Material ID. Let's do this for some of the other ones. Again, going to this green material, you'll notice same issue that we had before, so just bounce back to your material, back to the shading group, and now that will be refreshed and updated. Alright, so again back to the Material ID. Just apply that same green material. You can make the Material ID any color you want. Just for the sake of demonstration and making this a little bit easier for you to see, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure the Material ID is the same color as the base itself. There we go. Back to the Material ID. Sample that. Alright, and then I've gone ahead and done it to this pink material here as well. So if we were to take a look at its shading group, again, this little refresh issue, you'll need to get used to that, so just bounce back to your V-Ray material, back to the shading group, and now we're actually displaying the proper Material ID color. So again, just something to keep in mind and something to watch for, because you could inadvertently start changing Material ID colors for something that you may not necessarily want to. Now, when it comes to actually rendering out this Material ID that we've now set up, we need to jump back into the render settings. So let's jump over into the render elements for our V-Ray renderer. And now we can set this to render out a Material ID pass. So we'll just double click on this. That'll add the V-Ray Material ID render element. Now if we actually wanted to see what this looks like, we can jump back over to the V-Ray Common tab, scroll down toward the bottom, and we can tell Maya to render this out inside of the V-Ray frame buffer. So turn the V-Ray frame buffer on, and now, whenever we re-render our scene, we should see the V-Ray frame buffer pop up, and the image will be rendered into this frame buffer. Alright, so essentially just turning on this V-Ray frame buffer option will now render the image into this window instead of Maya's default render view. But the benefit of rendering it into this window whenever we start to use the render elements is the fact that we can actually see what render elements look like whenever we start to pull down this menu. So we have the normal RGB color. We have the alpha channel, which in my case I don't really have an alpha channel set up. And we can also take a look at the material ID. And now you can see we wind up with essentially just a flat rendered color that corresponds to the material ID. And in my case, again, just for the sake of consistency, I have taken the material ID for all of these objects and pretty much made them the same as their base color. So now, if I were to actually render this material ID out as a separate pass, now I have something that I could take back into my compositing application, or whatever application I'm using, and now I could very easily just sample this flat green color to use as a mask. And I can now just use that mask to make color corrections to just these particular areas of my scene. Alright, now when it comes to actually rendering that material ID out, that should be rendered out as a separate pass automatically whenever we go into our batch rendering and actually perform a batch render using V-Ray. Right, so that's a look at how we can start to take advantage of these material ID passes as a way of being able to very quickly mask out and color correct and make adjustments to very particular areas of our scene in our compositing or any kind of a post-production application.